Across the globe, justice systems are being reimagined through trauma-informed care, desistance theory, and neuroscience. At the forefront of this movement stands a voice for change, a trainer of professionals, and a storyteller committed to evidence-based reform. This is The Criminologist, the podcast exploring the people, the practices, and the possibilities shaping a more humane justice system. And now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 243 of The Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. In this episode, we continue my conversation with Stephen Pitts and Imants Mozers around their new book, The Missing Story, Probation, Legitimacy, and the Battle for Public Understanding. Now, because this engaging conversation ran for over 90 minutes, I decided to break this into two separate episodes. Now, part one has already been released, episode 241 of the Criminologist Podcast. And if you have not had a chance to listen to that episode yet, I would certainly encourage you to go back and start there. In part one, we began exploring the idea that probation has a story, but too often that story is incomplete, misunderstood, or simply not told with the clarity it deserves. We talked about public narratives, professional identity, legitimacy, and the challenge of helping society better understand what probation actually does. Now, in part two, we pick up right where we left off with the importance of listening to people with lived experience in the criminal justice system. Early in this portion of the conversation, Imants shares a powerful story from Latvia, his home nation, involving the rollout of electronic monitoring technology. As part of that public communication effort, a former inmate was invited to speak with the press and media about his own experience with electronic monitoring. And what happened was revealing. The journalists were not simply interested in the technology. They were drawn to the person who had lived it, his perspective, his reflections, and his ability to explain what this new approach actually meant from the inside. For Imants, that moment became a turning point. As you are about to hear, he describes it as the point where he never looked back in terms of understanding the power of lived experience. And I think that idea sits at the very heart of this broader conversation. If probation has a missing story, then part of what may be missing are the voices of the people most directly impacted by the system. Their insights do not replace research, policy, or professional expertise, but they deepen it, they humanize it, and they help us understand how justice interventions are actually experienced by the people we serve. So in this second part of the conversation, Stephen and Imants invite us to keep thinking about legitimacy, public understanding, and the stories probation needs to tell. Not only about itself, but with the people whose lives are shaped by it. This is a thoughtful, challenging, and deeply human continuation of our discussion. So let's return now to my conversation with Stephen Pitts and Imants Mozers, and I'll see you all on the other side. We're starting to see a little bit more of an embrace of the expertise of those with lived experience here in the United States, but I think it's just woefully lacking. So maybe go ahead and expand on that notion of utilizing folks with lived experience as that credible messenger, to coin a phrase.
Okay, I will go ahead. So we introduced electronic monitoring in Latvia more than 10 years ago. Yeah. Well, we are late to the party, but we're here. And so I did a media event. There is this gadget, everything, all the experts probation service has, of course, the director. And, the only first time what I did is actually have, it was 2 years down the line, electronic monitoring was active in Latvia. And I remember this media event where I had to wear the electronic bracelet because they were saying, no, it's only on table. We cannot have it on camera. There is no visual story behind that. And then none of the journalists was agreeing to put it on their leg because everyone was felt like, okay, that's bad luck, okay, right? So I ended up being the one putting the bracelet on my, foot. So my foot was all over the news back in the day. Very popular foot with the electronic bracelet. So luck was on my side thus far. I've been in probation, but on a different assignment. So 2 years down the line, I do have to make a good media event so that I can explain to people, okay, the system is introduced. What are the benefits? And I realize we're going to go back 2 years in time, and I will be, imitating something. And we really, first time we did find a super cool guy that was released on parole from prison with this bracelet. And I will just say that all the journalists clung to him and only spoke with him. And his story was so cool. Yeah, so basically he was the star of all the event. And imagine the story being told to all the news in Latvia is that he said, I wanted to get out of prison sooner because, while I was in prison, my son was born. And I'm losing time here. And, and he explained then everything about this gadget, about his wife, how he wakes up in the morning, goes to work, where he reports, how the system works. He was the one who was explaining that. And he explained exactly the benefits that society has. And from that point on, I never looked back. So, in case you think that the professionals can explain electronic monitoring, try giving the chance to a person that's been or is on electronic monitoring. I think he was still that. Yeah. Anyway, sorry for taking up so much time. But a story in a section of storytelling.
No, it's a great story. It reminded me of when you were speaking of, it sounded like you almost did a proactive press release to advise about the oncoming electronic monitoring rollout. When we were in Bali, I attended a session hosted by Jerome Harvey, who I believe is in your book as well. And he talked about their experiences in Turks and Caicos, whom they've only had probation for about 6 years, I want to say, but his presentation was all about how they did not want to mimic the implementation errors of so many other probation agencies. So they were very deliberate before they rolled out. They took certain implementation steps up to and including they had a massive public relations blitz to tell the public and the stakeholders what probation is, kind of what we've been unpacking this whole episode. And he said it just made a world of difference. And I'm thinking in hindsight, of course, none of us can hop in a time machine, but it's smart to be more proactive about that rather than trying to get the genie back in the bottle when there's a tragedy or a high profile crime or something of that nature. Yeah. So I applaud those proactive efforts, Imants.
It's a fantastic story, too, in the book about someone who has been on probation in the Turks and Caicos Islands and has become a person now who speaks on behalf of the service because it's so believable. It's so believable. And Singapore, too, they talk about it. Their network. And well, I think that people who have lived experience, they're very, very good at communicating with the judiciary, with the public, with the media, but also with people who are themselves moving through the system. And it's another aspect we should acknowledge as well. Incidentally, I was telling a story just the other day of when I wore an electronic bracelet. I was asked to pilot for 2 weeks, and generally speaking, you couldn't forget you're wearing it because it's heavy and clunky, and you have to sit by the electric socket for hours, and it wasn't a very nice experience. Once I'm sitting on the underground train, and the rows of seats are facing each other, and I forgot I was wearing it, and leg kind of raised very slightly, and the device was visible. I looked up, and the entire row opposite of people were staring at me, wondering who I was, and well, it kind of maybe gives a little bit of a flavor of what it can be like to be under the spotlight, and when we speak about desistance, we talk about how we're changing how we see ourselves, and then that sense of belonging, eventually, and that's another reason, coming back to communication, why our communication with communities is so important. Joe, I don't know if we're going to mention volunteers. I think we should. Can I just raise volunteers? So credible messengers, and that in Japan, for example, they've got 40,000, I think, Goshi volunteers, and a very nice account by one of the volunteers in our book. And, it's another fantastic example of community collaborating with us and also building bridges between ourselves and communities and helping to explain what probation is about and explain it in a way that neighbors can understand too. But by the way, they also talk about actions speaking louder than words. So when people in the community see volunteers actually working to support communities, working to support people who have offended, then that gives a very strong message too about how we can work together as a community to make society better.
Yeah, I've loved the work that they've done in Japan with volunteers. And to your point, Steve, I think that's another frontier that we really need to explore. And then just to put a bow on the lived experience talk, because we could talk about that forever. But my hope is that, and at least this is my perception here in the United States, that where we're starting to dabble in utilizing those individuals with lived experience, it's still, I think, more of a novelty type thing, right? Like have someone come out like Cam and give a keynote and then sort of usher you back out of the building type thing. They're not seen as equals. And we talk about desistance, and the definition of tertiary desistance is when there's that belonging. And I don't think here in the United States yet, we've still gotten past that sort of take someone with lived experience off the shelf, utilize back on the shelf, right? Versus like, no, you're part of the team. You're part of the circle here.
Well, Cam was posting only today, as it happens. If we can just come right up to date on this very topic, and making the point that it's not just about someone with lived experience being asked a question now and again, or occasionally giving a speech, but actually about real involvement, real participation, and management, being involved in leadership. Being a real full part of how things are developed and delivered.
Yeah, to that point, Joe, I think U.S. It's a big territory with different jurisdictions, but yeah, I would argue that even me and Steve, we have spoken to some people with lived experience that they are involved in on a high profile, and I applaud to that, because in Latvia it's not possible for now, just for legal reasons. If you have committed criminal offense, you have no way in working in certain fields anymore. But I do not believe, in old school. I believe in our society that we're progressive, and that will change, because I know for a fact I've been approached by a couple of people that we can now use a metaphor like Cam Stevens, and they've said, okay, I want to go work. I can only do these talks with other probation clients. I don't need this permission, but please give me this chance to do that free. fully for free, and it's sometimes not possible, but I think, Joachim Wildemann always keeps this one saying, and he even finishes letters with that. It's keep the faith.
Yeah, exactly. Keep the faith. Yeah, that's a good point you raise. I know that another good friend of ours, Bill Ananra, who I've met when he was at the World Congress in the Netherlands a couple of sessions ago, cannot come into the United States because of his criminal history. So when he's come to present at the American Probation and Parole Association, he'll do this via Zoom. But kind of to your point, Imants, that it's still not that sort of welcoming back. You've truly desisted. So still struggling with some of those systemic barriers. All right, gentlemen, we've already talked about one of my favorite topics today, desistance, quite a bit. And in the desistance literature, we talk about how oftentimes behavior follows identity. So if we can get the client to change their identity, the behavior follows. My contention, and actually I've been inspired by some work Shad Maroon has done on this, is if an agency or an entity changes their identity, then those collective behaviors will change as well. And like I said, Shad's done great work looking at various organizations, whether they're pro-social or antisocial, tapping into this formula, for example, of how does a 15-year-old, how do you convince a 15-year-old to do a drive-by shooting? You get them to identify as a gang member. That's how. Or conversely, how do you get these brave soldiers to jump out of an Apache helicopter as part of a Navy SEALs training? You get them to understand you're a Navy SEAL. This is your identity, or you're this elite law enforcement. That's your identity. Or whether it's fraternities or other things. Like if you change that group identity, you'll change the behaviors that way. So do you see parallels there in your work of agencies having success because they built a team identity, and that's how they get at that issue of, we talked about the two hats and the this and that, and get a more unified approach?
Steve, why don't you take this, internal from the internal buy-in aspect, and Joe, want to also apply the same principle to the external. Our relationships with society.
So it's a great question, Joe, and I like the is it a metaphor or a simile or whatever it is?
Right.
It works very well, and I think Shad has spoken, hasn't he, about work in Northern Ireland? It goes back a few years, and working in prisons and in the community there too, and how organisations have changed as with the people they've been working with. Yeah, I think there's a number of ways of looking at this, and I'm sure Imants will come in too. But for me, it's about the identity of the organisation. And I said at the beginning of our conversation how I've seen probation just in England and Wales shift its identity over the years. And if we look at Europe too, that's been very much the case with a colleague of mine, Leo Tigeth, we did some quite detailed work on success in building probation capacity in Europe. One of the real lessons there was clarity of vision, strong leadership, and how that's communicated with to everybody actually. And then if we bring that forward to our book, the couple of our contributors have spoken very passionately about how, as leaders, wanted to help to shape the organization and its direction. And they've spoken about how you can't. Actually, I think I might have a quotation here from Veronica Ballard-Cunningham from APPA. She said, one of the biggest mistakes organizations make is trying to fix external perception without addressing internal reality. So this is all about, we might call it internal communication or internal buy-in. And Jana Spiro from CEP says something actually also very similar about leadership, leaders who provide direction and strategy that gives staff then become proud of what they do. So I think this is addressing your question in a way, so about the whole organization being clear about setting out to do. But this begins with leaders. It begins with leaders who are themselves clear, who can communicate. But then everybody becomes a part of that organization, plays their part in communicating too, in all sorts of different ways, formally and informally.
I want to get Imants to chime in here, but I'm thinking about what you said earlier about how, for example, hospitals know their identity. People that work in a school district know their identity, but kind of to the point you were making, if you've got a school district where half the teachers think that their job is to advance the education levels of their students, and you got a big chunk of the school district that just thinks, no, it's all about attendance and behavioral issues. You get this mixed messaging, and like you said, Veronica, I love that quote. You got to get on the same page there. Imants, from that leadership standpoint, do you see again a certain value added of it's got to really boil down to leadership?
Yeah, I think. Before I take it external, now let's cover here a little bit. So, leadership is clear. It's not necessarily the boss or the decision maker. Leader, ideally, is the one and the same person. However, I truly believe that leaders are the ones who are responsible for shaping the future vision or setting the goal for the team and making it as clear the goal to the team that the team not only understands that, but also that becomes the part of their culture that drives themselves towards that. And in just plain terms of communication, what that should mean is for a leader maybe to create a shared language in the way we talk in our organization, and so that it really becomes the shared language. It's only theory now I'm saying, but unless that's done, then again we will have these micro theories still circulating. It will later bring me back to the fact about the negativity in the necessity to combat the people that the side of the community that is not understanding us or are against us, But closing this internal communication topic. Well, again, you need to have a narrative, and that needs to be the shared narrative in a shared language. That then can be something like a culture. Of course, it needs to be known that, your workers can be paid, they have their time, off. They, their family needs are also respected. But I mean, just only on the communication level, narrative, shared language, and a good example to lead with. Otherwise, these small gaps that you have not covered will start covering you. And this brings me right out, as I promised earlier. I want to also shift this concept into the external communication.
Yeah.
Because also I've been guilty for doing that. I've been thinking, oh my God, there is this segment of people that really do not understand probation, and they are very punitive and they're pro-prison and whatnot. I was imagining things, also because, you need to have a, proper survey to tackle these. Then I found theory cannot quote the author, but it's scientifically proven in communication that it is nonsense to try to prove people that are against you or try to bring them on your side, because the return of investment is minuscule. What is important is to empower people that already side with you on some cultural terms, not necessarily that they support probation or whatnot, but people that are more inclined, to side with your story. empower those as much as possible, serve their needs, because they will be the ones that take your story further. And then that can start to make a dent in the ones that are undecided or in the middle, not neutral, and just looking for the best word for that. And these are the two segments to work for, because so that much about, trying to create a culture and how to create a bigger impact. And maybe that also comes down to just organizational culture, just work with the best, help them become so good that they want to impact others, so that culture overtakes.
Yeah.
Because there will be odd things happening in any organization. Probation is not going to be, one safe place where that does not happen.
As you spoke, Imants, it reminded me of my past experiences as an evidence-based practice trainer before I retired from government and got into full-time training and consulting. But I remember we would always cringe when we heard a trainer try to convince, like you said, those people that were unconvincible by throwing out stuff like, well, the research says, or according to the research. We thought, like, if there's one thing to kill the vibe, it's just, say, well, the research shows. Rather, as you said, no, find those folks who are a little bit ambivalent that you can push them to your side. And then it's sort of that teeter-totter effect. Then the rest of the naysayers will come along. But you can't just beat them over the head with the research or the meta-analysis or the this or that, because you'll never change the hearts and minds that way.
Yeah. Also, Joe, I'll just drop this idea out there. People all around the world know this. Yeah, let's fight stereotypes. Mm-hmm. What I think is, let's finally start talking, what matters. Because then again, we're just falling back into that same trap, what probation is not. Right. We are now going to go over everywhere and explain, no, you are wrong. And explain what probation is not again, but in a different way. I think this needs to be out there, in terms of finding our identity, our narrative, and finally getting on with our work. It's a hard one. Yeah, it'll take ages.
We've talked about the role of leadership in changing that culture and that narrative. But for someone who's out there listening, say a practitioner, what's something they can start doing to change that narrative and or to strengthen that legitimacy of the field of probation? What can they do to sort of pick up the mantle, if you will?
Well, I think practitioners, they don't work on their own. I understand the question, but practitioners are part of an organization. I've usually been a part of an organization. I'm not now, but I have a voluntary role with a number of organizations, including ambassador for the CEP, but I'm essentially independent. I think, Joe, that practitioners have a huge role to play. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be clear about that. And practitioners can be leaders too in all sorts of ways. Practitioners, they speak with their families. They're the first line of speaking with the people that we work with. They're the people who are in courts and speaking directly and most often with the judiciary. They're the people who liaise with the other organizations, the other government organizations, with the municipalities that are so important for our work. And I think, as Imants was saying, and you're implying, Joe, that narrative is a narrative which can be owned and developed by everybody. A really good step is for leaders to work in a very visible and obvious way with colleagues, with practitioners, about developing that narrative and getting a kind of agreed understanding. Everyone can put into that. So can people with lived experience put it too, and volunteers. This is a combined effort, and the result of that is that we should be, hopefully, roughly on the same page. Yeah, there's going to be differences, and that's great, and absolutely there should be. But in the key things, we're on the same page, and we're all involved in communicating and being very proactive too with everybody. whether that's with the judiciary, with the municipalities, picking up on a point Imants was making, a lot of the strength comes from leaders and practitioners meeting with others who are going to then understand and buy into what we're doing. And we saw that in work that I referred to previously with Leo in Europe, of how building those alliances is a really critical part of creating a successful organization. But yeah, that goes right the way across the organization, everybody, including practitioners, and how practitioners are then empowered to speak with everyone they come into contact with. Hope I'm on question. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. And you've both got me thinking. There's a good point too when we talk about leadership. That's not necessarily the individuals who are at a higher pay grade or in an official position. But again, when I reflect on the agencies that I've trained with over the years, I could look at line staff members and say, no, Steve's the leader of that agency, not his director, not his supervisor, because he has that cachet, he has that voice, almost like the most popular kid in the classroom is really the leader of that, unofficial leader. But we have to recognize that and tap into that and leverage that.
Also, Joe, in our book, I would have forgotten to say that, but maybe to our readers, when they get to this book, it is very important to understand the word leadership we use exactly in the way, Joe, you just explained. So it's all the leadership, starting from the ministers of justice down to the very small teams, because you create the environment, you create the mentality in those teams, and you cannot expect one person to do that. You have to have people siding with you across the board.
Yeah. Well, speaking of your book, obviously I will leave a link for the book in the show notes of the podcast, but I also want to draw the viewers and the listeners' attention to your website, www.probationfutures.com. Tell folks what they'll experience when they go to probationfutures.com, gentlemen.
Well, this book, now that, now, Joe, your viewers saw in your hand, it's in a very limited edition print, available to those who participated in the World Congress on Probation and Parole in Bali. Also, huge thanks for the Dutch Probation International Office for helping with printing this limited edition. But probationfutures.com is the place for you to go. Please drop your email there. There's a waiting list open because the digital version of this book is coming out later this year. And it's not only going to be a reading thing for you, but all of our guests, that some of those were mentioned already in this podcast, and many more are also will be there in podcast versions. Me and Steve, we talked to them when making this book. So expect to get access also to exciting talks, right around 20 exciting discussions with one of the world's brightest minds in probation and parole, if I may say so. But yes, please do go to probationfutures.com. Also, please do find us on LinkedIn. We will start creating the buzz soon. Yeah, please follow us. Yeah, and also we will make sure that you can leave your feedback and contact us via LinkedIn or anywhere.
When I look at the contributors to the book, to your point, Imants, it's a who's who of individuals that I hold in high regard and consider many of them friends. So it is a great read. I'll ask this last question to the both of you. Just looking ahead, we talked a lot about that variable of hope in the desistance process and what a incredibly impotent elixir that is. Looking ahead, what gives you hope about the future of probation?
I'm optimistic, Joe. I'm optimistic for a few reasons. Let me mention two of those. One is, we touched on it already, the World Congresses on Probation and Parole, and alongside that, the Congresses on Community Volunteers. We're coming up to the 8th Congress, which will be in Latvia. I'm sure Imants will say a word or two about that in a moment. But those congresses are fantastic. They bring people together, of course, exchange ideas, but also enriching, as we touched on earlier in our discussion, enriching about the different value bases, different philosophical bases. And then, as a result, the different practices, the different communications about those practices. I think it's so helpful, enabling us to look into what's happening around the world, to take from that and to have the opportunity to improve our own services. And not only do we have that global network, but also regional networks are developing as well. We already have the CEP in Europe, which I'm proud to be ambassador for. We have APPA in the USA, and other networks that are beginning to develop already do exist. For example, in the Caribbean Association of Probation and Parole, and they will have a later this year, of course, and a network that's beginning in Africa too. And I know there are discussions in Asia. So this is wonderful, and how these networks provide the chance to come together. And then the other is that a network, the development of a network that will bring people together between the congresses too. And I think that has so much opportunity to become strategic in how we think about probation, how we develop probation, how we explain what it is, how we explain how it matters, explain its value base, and so forth. So lots and lots of potential there, I think. So watch this space. I'm excited by both of those developments and by others, which time won't allow me to go into now.
Before I hear from you, Imants, I just wanted to comment. You talked about the value of networking, and what I've noticed with the explosion of technology, in due in large part, sadly, I think, to COVID and the lockdowns. But nonetheless, Stephen, if you could just reflect on, your first World Congress, where you saw those folks and you maybe didn't speak to anybody until the next Congress from 2 years. Here, we were just in Bali, and my LinkedIn page has exploded, and my Zoom meetings have exploded. But I don't think of this as much as this far away global community that I have no access to. In fact, I can share a quick story with you. At the Congress, I was meeting with an old connection, Pia Puolaka from Finland, and we did the obligatory take a picture together, post it on LinkedIn, and she sent me a text the next day saying, "It was great seeing you the other day." She said, "It was great to finally meet you in person." And I was taken aback. I was like, "No, Pia, I've known you for years." But it dawned on me, it's like, well, yeah, you've known her, Jill, because you've done Zoom meetings with her. I've collaborated with her on a couple of webinars together. But, we had this strange, for lack of a better term, closeness where it's like, wait a minute, we've met before. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, through the power of the digital age we live in, the miles were gone. It was just crazy. So I think that's in our favor as well, as we're sharing these global experiences, but we're able to localize them through the technology. But Imants, go ahead. What is your hope for the future of probation?
I mean, you already said the most beautiful thing, so you leave me almost with nothing. So I fully agree with what you said, and if I had the chance, I would pick couple of your examples as the ones I would say, but I will then do it differently. I believe in the future of probation because now finally also probation understands, I think it begins to understand that the good work it does, it is being improved day by day. Professionals, really they work hard to improve their skills, and also to always go back and reassess how they dealt with situations, and every time they improve. But yeah, the community has come to realization that probation is not a lone island. Mm-hmm. Even Bali was not a lone island. There's many islands also in that chain, It's a bigger part of Indonesia, and Indonesia is a part of a bigger, global community. I think for probation, it's the same thing. So it's not only going to be realizing that you work with offenders, but you work for the public. And then the public now wants to know why do we support that? What does it give me? Why do I need that? I already had prison, Why do we need to spend more money? Still keep the prisons running. I'm putting out, ridiculous questions here just to make a build up. What I want to say is my true hope is that probation will really find its identity, or it will be a launch pad for that if we will start to think in terms of value. And if we have to leave this conversation with one question, also for the audience, we can attach value. Even previously, we said we can attach value to prisons, to police, to hospitals. There were many things mentioned. We can attach value to an older version of iPhone to the latest version of iPhone. However, we have this problem. We cannot, I cannot attach, some value in my head to probation. If I was just an outsider, even for a professional, it's pretty difficult. So I think if we dig for the question, what is the value of probation it brings to our societies, we stand to live to the day that we find our identity, find our shared narrative, even globally. And we can have that probation that we also dream about. This system will be more complex, but the realization that we have come to this point that we are discussing this is the big hope that, we're going to go bigger and higher, harder, faster, stronger.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm not going to let you go, Imants, without giving a shout out to the next World Congress, which will be in your home country of Latvia, but give what I'm sure will be many promotional shout outs over the next couple of years for the next World Congress.
Well, Latvia is super honored to host the next World Congress on Probation and Parole. It is going to be in May in 2028 in Riga, Latvia. Riga is the capital of Latvia. You can use Google Maps to find that. But what we already are discussing as an important part of the Congress is we do want the main message of the Congress to be human-centered. So human is in the center. It is it will still take shape, but what we understand by human, it is the offender, it is the victim, it is the practitioner, it is our neighbor in our communities. It is also, people in the criminal justice system chain. Really, we hope to look at all the subjects that are important on daily basis from the perspective of human, and we hope it is going to be very rich in content, and we have already started work on that with some big names. I think I'm not authorized to say this yet, but please believe me, this will be a very very diverse, but also very very contently rich Congress. And of course, we hope to have a beautiful cultural program alongside with that. And everyone, please stay tuned. Something on the internet will be popping up, so we will be starting to talk about the Congress as early as possible.
I'm confident it's going to be an amazing event in beautiful Latvia. Imants Mozers, Stephen Pitts. Until next time, friends, thank you so much for your contributions to the Criminologist Podcast. Take care. Until next time.
A pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
As we bring part 2 of this conversation to a close, I want to again thank Stephen Pitts and Imants Mozers for joining us on the Criminologist Podcast. This conversation centered on their work, The Missing Story, Probation, Legitimacy, and the Battle for Public Understanding. And the more I sit with that title, the more I think it captures one of the central challenges facing the field. Probation has a story, but too often that story is incomplete, misunderstood, or told by others. In this second part of our discussion, Stephen and Imants helped us think about the importance of identity, leadership, shared language, and public legitimacy. They reminded us that probation cannot assume its value is self-evident. Agencies need to be able to explain what they do, why it matters, and how the work contributes to a safer, healthier community. That requires leadership. It requires a shared vocabulary. And it requires a willingness to tell the story clearly, honestly, and strategically. I also appreciated Imants' point that agencies need to think carefully about where they place their energy. Sometimes the best return on investment is not found in trying to persuade those who are firmly opposed, but rather in strengthening the understanding of those who are open, curious, and willing to help carry the story forward. And that story must include the voices of people with lived experience. Their insights help us understand how justice interventions are actually experienced, not only how they are designed on paper. Stephen also reminded us that probation's future is increasingly international. Professional networks such as the American Probation and Parole Association, the Confederation of European Probation, the Caribbean Association of Probation and Parole, and emerging networks in Africa are helping the field learn across borders and build a stronger global identity. That international conversation will continue in Riga, Latvia in May of 2028, when the next World Congress on Probation and Parole takes place in Imants' home country. And for those interested in learning more about Probation Futures Volume 1, please visit probationfutures.com. That's probationfutures.com. There you can learn more about the missing story, probation, legitimacy, and the battle for public understanding, and sign up to receive access to the digital version of this book when it becomes available later this year. And if you've not yet listened to part 1 of this conversation, I encourage you to go back and check it out. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Criminologist Podcast. Please subscribe, share this episode with a colleague, and keep asking the question that Stephen and Imants placed before us. What story is probation telling, and who is helping tell it? And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
What is important is to empower people that already side with you on some, cultural terms, not necessarily that they support probation or whatnot, but people that are more inclined, to side with your story.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, training opportunities, program design, or interview requests, visit theparagongroup.llc.com. To learn more about the TIDES supervision model, a trauma-informed, desistance-based approach to community supervision, please visit TIDESLLC.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check out the Criminologist YouTube channel for additional content, including exclusive video interviews and international insights. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Don't forget to give the show a 5-star review. And as always, thank you for listening.